Hello, everybody. It's very nice to be with you here today. I'm very thankful for the invitation. And I'm really going to be talking today about a topic that's really dear to my heart because this is the topic of my research. There's been 15 years that now I'm studying decision processes and trying to see how we can avoid critical mistakes when we actually make a decision. So just a quick note of introduction about myself. I'm actually an alumni from HEC Paris. I don't know if you know all the programs that HEC Paris is offering, but the first one is like the Grande École program. So I graduated from the Grande École in 2005, and then I've done my PhD at Cornell University in the US, got my first job at McGill, and then a few years ago, 2019, HEC asked me to come back, and now I'm actually teaching in the MBA program, Executive MBA program, and I'm heading like the marketing of a portfolio in executive education. So today, really what I'm going to talk about is behavioral science. What do we know about behavioral science that can actually enlighten how we make decisions, right? And try to avoid cognitive traps, like little missteps that we can actually make when we take a decision. So I'm going to apologize in advance because today I'm going to take very, very extreme examples. And very simplified example, but I only have 50 minutes and I want those examples to really, really be in your mind for at least the next few days, hopefully forever. But I'm really going to take very extreme example, okay? So my very first question before jumping into the example is really a pretty simple question to you. And if you have a few words that come to your mind, don't hesitate to say them. But if I'm going to talk about avoiding cognitive mishaps, if I'm going to talk about trying to optimize the way you are making your next big strategic decision, it means that somehow I'm assuming that there are some good decisions and there are some bad decisions. So how do you know in your job, with your professional experience, whether a decision that you took was good or not good? What are some words that come to your mind? Does anybody want to try? If you want to try, you can just raise your hand and tell me. Hard question? Maybe it's a harder question that it looks, right? But how do we do in everyday life to check whether a decision that we took was good or not? Sorry? Numbers, yes, thank you. So numbers, so it means that somehow maybe you had an objective that was framed in numbers, and then you check whether you actually reached this objective, whether your numbers actually fit with your objectives. And it is true that most of the time, when we evaluate whether a decision was good or not, we are going to look at the outcome, right? At the results. What happened after I took the decision? But I was talking about extreme example today, so here's the first one. Do you remember who Paul the Squid was? Who was he? Does it talk to you? I see some people nodding, yes. Paul the Squid, right? Paul the Squid, it was the World Cup in soccer, right, a few years ago, and Paul the Squid came to fame because he actually had all the prediction for all the soccer game become true, right? So is it based on his knowledge? Is it because he knows what's going to happen? Is it his experience in soccer, right? Was it a good decision here? No, right? Paul the Squid, this is a heuristic question. Paul the Squid is not a good decision maker, so how on earth can he get everything correct? What do you think? What happened here? What happened here? Maybe it's coming in your mind, but it's fully chance here. Do we all agree with that? It's chance, right? This is completely chance, and I mean, the next question is, how a squid can be that lucky? Right? How is that possible? Right? It's because if you think about the prediction, if you think, I don't exactly remember the outcome here, like I think the probability is something like below 1%. If you have enough squids making the same type of prediction, ultimately, you're going to have one squid that's going to get everything correct, and it's purely luck. Right? We just remember the one squid that got everything correct. So this is something to be really important when we make a decision. And what I'm going to tell you as an introduction here is that there is really no good decision just based on the outcome. Most of the time, good outcomes are going to come from a good way of making the decision. So it's not as if there's good or bad outcome, there's only good or well-taken decision. So the way you actually make the decision, the way you actually control your decision-making process is going to have a tremendous impact on your results. But it has to be distinguished from all the uncontrollable factor, which is what I call here luck, right? And as well the implementation. So today, in this hour, the only thing I'm really going to talk about is the decision process. And I put decision architecture here because what I want you to remember after today is really to take ownership of the way you make decision, right? And I'm going to try to tell you that at each step of your decision-making process, there's going to be some traps in which we can fall that can actually make it a biased decision and therefore lead to maybe suboptimal decision. And one of the things about those cognitive traps that we call heuristic or decision bias is that if I were going to look at each of you independently, you might see some bias, yes or no. But what's important is that these are group effects. Is that in biases, what tends to happen is that each of us tend to make small mistake, but in the same direction. And that collectively, that can happen to large misunderstanding, right? A lack of discussion, entrapment, and ultimately suboptimal decision making. So if we had a full session at HEC Paris on this topic, I usually ask the participants, well, how do you make a decision? Right? How do you make a decision? And most of the time, numbers comes. Right? So when we're talking about numbers, we're going to talk about facts. We're going to talk about asking people around us what they think. So all of that comes very, very fast. This is what I call here information gathering. How do you collect information to actually make your decision? And then there is a time when you actually come to conclusion. You actually decide, right? So that comes actually most of the time very, very easily. Two steps that are usually less understood is first the framing of a decision, which is really what problem am I trying to solve? So this phase, and I'm going to start a little bit on that and the cognitive traps we can fall in this step, but this is really the idea that sometimes the issue at hand or the question that you are asking is not the right question. Right? That somebody else might see the problem differently and ask a different question. Right? And then there is the last steps as well that does not necessarily come naturally, which is learning from experience. If we were to talk more in smaller groups, you'll probably tell me I'm going to rely not only on data and asking other people, but I'm also going to rely on what my experience is telling me, right? And so it means that if you're looking into your experience, it means that you've learned from past experience, right? And you know what works and does not work. And I will talk here a little bit about cognitive traps that can make it a little bit difficult actually to learn about our past experience. All right. So here today, the goal is not for me to tell you, each time you have a decision, you have to go through those steps. It's not that at all, right? Depending on the type of decision, you might go much faster. Sometimes the framing is done for you. Sometimes you already have all the data that is available to you. But my goal is to show you some cognitive issues, some cognitive traps that you can fall into at each of those 4 steps. And so at least to make you aware of those, right? So that at the end of this session, at least you get some keys to try to avoid them. And I'm also going to give you some readings if you are interested in the topic, so that you can keep learning about that. All right. So the first type of bias that can happen is all the biases that comes from framing effect. So I was just talking about the fact that the first step is framing, or thinking about we understand the question that is being asked. So the framing effect is the fact that just the way the information is structured, or just the way we see a problem is already going to bias the way we are going to collect information, the way we are going to collect data, and the way we are going to actually think about the problem. So this is relatively abstract, because anything related to cognition and to information processing is very abstract, right? And basically studying in my research how we think, right? And the way we can actually get some type of missteps or some little viruses in our head that make us biased as a society, right? So this is pretty hard to make light of it. So what I'm going to do today is that I'm going to show you some perceptual biases that are basically framing effect. So how does the concept, the context, how does what we see around us, the way the problem is structured for us, how that can already lead to some biases. Right. So this is the idea that when we think about a problem, we already have a very, very subjective way to look at the problem, right? Based on the context, based on what we have seen, based on how we interpret the problem. We see a problem, we are going to make inferences about it. So here, if you look at this little square here, and if you look at this little square here, I'm going to ask you, is it the same color? Some people start to know me already a little. Yes, it's the same color. Right. But that being said, even for the person who said, like me, I know it's the same color, we try to counteract it, and we can't. I still see it as two different colors. Right? I'm happy to distribute my slides after if you want proof. But here I put actually like the same band of colors on PowerPoint. Right? And you see it's actually exactly the same, right? Even then, though we start to see some type of gradual difference, right? But this is really the idea of biases, is that everybody in this room see it as a different color, while actually it's the same color, and it's very difficult to counteract it. And it's just here that our brain tries to make sense of a shade, and therefore plays a little trick on us, right? And this is the same thing with cognitive biases. And so one of the key takeaways for today's session, and this is why I actually love talking about those topics, when you get out of the room, is not to think I am not biased, because I'm going to tell you that's already a bias to think we are not biased, but it's actually to think that we are all a little bit biased. Right. That's, I think, a very key takeaway. And the fact that we all need to be very careful about the way we make decisions. So I gave you some other examples. I like this one because it's very easy to counter. Is that the same gray? Yes, thank you. All right, so obviously now you maybe start to know me as well a little bit. It is the same gray. So one thing you can do is actually put two fingers in the middle. All right, so you can do something like, and then suddenly you actually see it at the same gray. Right? So you just counteract something, a little trick that your brain is playing on you, and you actually counteract it. Again, same thing, same idea with framing biases. It's the way you see the situation. So let's say here, very visually, you have a situation for a decision. You have some key criteria to take into account. It could be like closing a plant. It could be hiring somebody. It could be deciding about sustainability issues within your company. You see the problem a certain way, right? And here I'm going to show you a situation that is quite pessimistic. I am not saying it's always like that, but your way of seeing the situation, because we cannot process all information, because it is really hard, it's almost impossible for our brain to take into account all information, we are going to simplify it. We are going to see it a certain way, right? And at HEC Paris, I'm a marketing professor. I also teach in strategy sessions about decision making. But if you think about launching a product, right? So you can have a marketing way of thinking about the launch of a product that might impact, customer satisfaction. It might impact customer loyalty. We're going to think about price. And then you're going to have a finance department that's going to see the launch of a very, very different way. You might have R&D that's going to see the launch of a certain way. And basically here, you might have meetings that look very much like that, right? With people who see part of a problem, but they do not see the entire problem, right? And the more you go up in a company, the more you're becoming a decision maker, like in the full sense of the term. The more you go towards CEO position, the more you need to embrace all of those frames, right? So in a meeting like that, which again is quite pessimistic, you end up with a lot of conflict, right? Simply because everybody sees the problem of a different way. Of course, here what's going to be important is to cover as much as possible the blue area, right? So it means that if you have one expert who actually can cover all of the blue area very well, no worries, you're fine. But in most situations, it's not the case, right? Most of the time, you need a team to see the entire problem. And what it means here, it's actually the reason why we need diversity in teams, right? We need diversity members who are extremely experts of a topic, of course, but we also need perspective taking. Right. And what is very important here is that if you have a meeting like that, and you know before going into a meeting that the meeting is going to be conflictual, or maybe not leading to a good outcome, one thing you can do before the meeting is actually to try to have a frame alignment, right? Understand what is important for the other person. Because what this other person is seeing might not be what you see, right? Might not be that important for you, but is very important for them. Right, and you need to understand why it's actually important for them. Right? So this is kind of the basics here of framing. But in terms of the first key takeaway here, for you, I would say be aware that you actually have automatic frames based on your job, based on your past experiences, and be aware that the way you set the problem, the way you think of a problem, what question you actually ask, right? Whether it's an ethical frame, whether it's a marketing frame, whether it's a finance frame, is actually going to impact ultimately your decision, right? In other people, well, try to highlight other people frames in negotiation before entering a meeting, right? So that you know what is important to them, so that you can think about where the meeting is going to go before you enter the room. And assume that very few people take the time to actually, educate themselves, learn about decision-making processes. So you can assume that already you know more than other people in the room just because you are aware of the importance of framing. And if you have a decision that's going to be conflictual, think about aligning frames, think about creating a new frame for the decision at stake, and be careful about things that are framed for you, that might put into shadows very important decisions or options that maybe are not in light. So sometimes we have, should we launch product A or should we launch product B? That's forgetting that maybe we should not launch product, or maybe we should launch product C, or we should launch a different version of product A. All right. So the way you're actually going to frame this question is going to have obviously an impact on how you end up making a decision. So that's it for framing. It's really just a short introduction today, and I want to jump into biases that really come up when we gather information, because this is really like the big part here of biases. Most biases come when we actually collect information. And here, what's interesting is that most of us, we do not think we are biased. So that's called the bias blind spot, right? We actually do not see that we are biased. By the way, what's quite funny is that we are very good at seeing biases in others, usually. Right? So again, that says something about the importance to have a good team that is actually can tell you the biases you have, because we won't see them in ourselves. And it's kind of, here when we're gathering information, it's kind of sometimes I'll show you how we can hide behind facts. Right. And what I'm going to tell you is that especially today, in our information-rich world, you will always find somewhere, and I'll give you an example, you can always find somewhere a fact or pseudo-fact that can back up what you want to back up. So we cannot just look for fact that confirms what we were thinking. Right? This is what I'm going to talk about here. So here I want to start with a bias that Daniel Kahneman, I'll talk a little bit about Daniel Kahneman afterwards, was saying is the mother or father of any bias, and that's the overconfidence bias. Right? So this idea that we have a bias blind spot, and the fact that we tend to think that we are not falling into those traps, the idea that we tend to know more than other people, right? And that we have the expertise to make this decision, right? Independent of what other people are saying. Right? So this is overconfidence, and overconfidence is going to spawn a number of bias. I'll talk quickly about 3 today, but it's really at the moment you're thinking, I already know enough, you're going to bypass the decision-making process. And back to my first slide, what I was telling you is that basically there is a difference between the moment when you have your first hint, the first gut feeling of what you should do, right? This is not your decision. And your final outcome. There is a process here between the time you think you know what you should be doing and the actual final decision. There is a process, there is deliberation that's going to help you. All right. So the Dunning-Kruger effect here, that's actually talking about overconfidence, is this idea that when we know absolutely nothing about a topic, nothing, we're actually not going to say we're overconfident. Right? So I'm pretty bad at drawing. If somebody was asking me, can you draw somebody? I'd be telling you, no, there's no way I can do better than my 7-year-old. Right? It's absolutely terrible. Okay, but so pretty fast though, what's going to happen is that as soon as we start knowing a little bit more about a topic, right, we start having experts everywhere. Right? And why are we seeing those experts with a bit too much confidence is because they know what they know, but they do not realize the extent of what they do not know, right? And the complexity of the situation. So this is why when there is, coming from France, I'll talk about soccer, right? When there is a soccer World Cup, right, we are going to see a lot of people that can do better than the national trainer, right? When we have elections, we might think that we know better solutions maybe than the president. Right? So all of that is actually the overconfidence effect, meaning that we are aware of what we know, but we are not aware yet of what we don't know. What happens is that as soon as you start actually digging into the topic, you realize that you actually don't know much. Right? So these are students who are doing a PhD, right? Who are thinking at the beginning of a PhD, oh, well, I think I can, graduate in 3 years. And then as soon as they are year 1 or year 2, suddenly they're like, okay, well, maybe I need 7 years. And this is kind of the value of despair. But as you get to know a little bit more, you get into the slope of enlightenment, and you actually get at the adequate level of confidence. So overconfidence is really what most of people do. We tend to believe in ourselves. About 90% of the population, we tend to be overconfident. It does not mean that we don't have some people who are underconfident. And there's some interesting research on that, but I won't talk too much about it. So, I'm telling you, most of the time, we tend to be overconfident, and overconfidence can lead to biases in judgment and decision making. But one underlying question is, well, I kind of have to be showing confidence. Like, otherwise my teams are not going to follow me. I cannot show that I cannot be a leader if I'm actually saying to people, I don't know what I should be doing. So you're right. If you're thinking that, you're right. But my way to answer that is that there is a difference, again, between the time you are in the process of deciding, you're thinking about the different options, and the time once you've made your decision, and you're confident you've made the right decisions because you had the right process, and you're confident about selling it to your team. So again, what I'm saying is that there are two times. There is the time where you're actually thinking, you're deliberating, and the time you're selling it. And yes, when you're selling it, of course, you're not going to convince anybody if you do not have confidence. So to put that into a framework, this idea here is that after today, what I'm telling you is that you have to be here. So you have to be uncertain that you have all of the information. You have to be uncertain always that maybe you're missing some elements you didn't know, right? But you have to be confident, right, that you can make a good decision. That by listening other people around you, by getting, and I'm going to show you what type of data you should be looking for, right? By actually following the right decision-making process, by questioning yourself, you will be able to actually make the right decision, right? So the idea is not to be stuck somewhere, not being able to make a decision. Or it's 100% the opposite. It's actually giving you the keys so that you're confident that you're following the right process and not getting into traps, right? Obviously, we want to avoid you not being, thinking you don't have all the information and be like, well, after today, I don't know how to make a decision. That's not that at all. It's actually just being aware of traps so that you can actually move forward. All right. So the problem of when we are a little bit overconfident and we think we already have all of the information, we are going to take shortcuts. Right? We're going to want to go fast. Right? We're going to use what we name in research heuristics. Right? The heuristic is a shortcut to make a decision. There are three big heuristics. There is the availability anchoring, the availability bias. So it's one heuristic. We are going to tend to recall information that comes easily in our mind. Right? So, I know this situation that was like last year. With big framing effect here, like if you're thinking it was the same as last year. Or I know right away what type of information I need, right? So the availability. And there is anchoring. We tend to anchor too much our decision process on this first gut feeling. And then, at the end, there is the confirmatory bias that says that we tend to look at information that's going to confirm our gut feeling. Right? So now, if you're doing that, you really do not have a decision-making process. Right? So you have a gut feeling. As soon, and I'll talk a little bit about intuition afterwards, but as soon as you hear something, you're going to have a gut feeling, and you're going to look, based on your framing of the situation, right? And you're going to look at information or data, and again, I'll give you like a very striking example after, but you will be able to find data that confirms what you're thinking. Okay, for everything in life, we can find data that confirms what we're thinking. But by doing that, your decision process is very much truncated. All right. So I'll try to take, again, a striking example. Imagine that here I am judged for murder. I'd have been accused. You're judging me. Okay. I would find it extremely biased, right? If you were only going to look at information that would tend to say that I'm guilty. We don't do that, right? We don't do that. We know it's completely biased to do that. Obviously, we know to do better, right? And we know to do better in law because we know it's biased, right? But so why are we not doing the same for management decision, for leadership decision, which are as well extremely important and can impact other people's lives? Right? So what does it mean? It means if I have a gut feeling, if I have a first idea, if product A or product B, you need to look as well at information that goes against what you were thinking, a divergent information. And there is only divergent information, information that tells you you are wrong. That's the only type of information that is actually valuable. You are not learning anything by looking at information that you already knew was correct. Right? Here you are simply justifying yourself. Right? By, okay, I had a gut feeling, let me look at information that says I'm correct, and me show that to my management. No, let's look at the entire situation with the right team, right? Let's structure the problem in the way that's the most encompassing as possible, and then let's look at both parts of information. Because if we don't do that, then, again, we just see what we want to see. And, framing at the beginning, when I was talking about that, it's kind of looking at the problem with a specific window. This is our window. We want to see the problem this way. But with heuristics and with confirmation bias, what we tend to see is that the window is actually just a mirror. Right? We are looking at ourselves. What we were thinking was correct. And we love thinking we're correct. Right? It's always very destabilizing to think that we might be wrong. Right? But if you are in front of a very difficult strategic decision impacting other people's life, I'm telling you, just look as well at the information that tells you might be wrong. Right? This is just one example. There are many examples of confirmation bias. I don't know if some of you have heard about Elizabeth Holmes. Right? She is an American saying that she had found a way to actually make blood tests at home. Right, so you can do blood tests at home, you can get the results at home. It just so ended up that she actually didn't have anything. Right, so you had investors investing billions of dollars in her startup, while actually she didn't have anything. What I find very interesting here is the way she defended herself in the lawsuit, because of course at some point somebody discovered something and there was a lawsuit. She actually is in jail now, if I'm not mistaken. She lost her lawsuit, but the way she defended herself was very interesting. What did she say? Nobody asked me anything. Right? It's not my fault. I just said something, and the investors never went to ask me for evidence. Right? That says something that when we want to see something, right, we will see it. We will only look at part of information instead of really asking for what she has. Right. All right. And it is true that it is really hard to change one's mind. It's some situation when we get very defensive, it is really hard, and we are going to want to say things like, that's not what my experience is telling me, always done it like that, why do you want to change things, it's not going to work. But what I'm going to tell you is that you're much more better off in terms of large decision-making, large strategic decision-making, to approach a problem with a little bit of humility, confident humility, right? Showing a little bit of doubt, being curious, and being in a mindset of curiosity and discovery about what other people think, how they see the problem. Then you make your own decision, by all means. But at least you're aware of it. And you can decide whether it is important and should be inside your decision-making process, or whether you should just forget about it. Right. What I want you to avoid in the future is to have, your gut feeling, your conviction that something is correct, going to look at information that confirms what you were thinking, feeling validated and feeling very proud, right? Because that leads to defense mechanism, and it is not good, right? To coexist and to talk with others and to exchange ideas. So the curiosity mindset is usually better to exchange ideas. And here again, I'm very sorry for my extreme examples today, but I'm going to take the most extreme example I could find. And if you have others, you can tell me. But that's the one I picked. The fact that in today's world we can still have people thinking, the Earth is flat. Right? And it's kind of incredible that you have something very scientific, right? We have evidence, and you still have people who will be actually able to hold the reasoning and to quote facts to say that the Earth is flat. Imagine if we find, I do have, I don't have actually, I'm very sorry, I don't have the percentage, but in the US it's about 17%, in Brazil it's 9% of people who think the Earth is flat. It's huge, right? In France, I don't know in South Korea, but in France we're at about 9%. This is huge, and you might tell me, oh no, but our rate is not going to be as high. And to some extent, I don't really care about the proportion. I just need one person. I just need one person to be able to hold this reasoning, to be able to say at the end that you can, if you are really motivated to defend your conviction, you will find a reasoning, you will find your way to write a story, to have a narration that says that you're correct. Right. And this is where it gets very dangerous in management decision. And imagine if I can find that on such a belief that has strong evidence that you can find easily. Imagine in the world of management. Right. Imagine in the world of management how easy it is to actually defend an idea that may not have actually solid ground. So what I'm going to tell you is that your beliefs do not define you, except for your values. Values are very different. Values are what are guiding you. This is what make you, and this is what's going to make you frame decision a certain way. Your values are very important. But whether it's your belief about launching a product, any type of management decision, for instance, hiring decision, thinking about the next step, the strategic next step in your company, most of the time your belief should not define you, right? They are not your identity. We should be able to change our beliefs about what we should be doing based on new information, based on new data. Right? And the person that you are today is not the person you were 1 year ago. And if I'm telling you that it's very important to look at information that says you're wrong, that is divergent when you're collecting information, it really means that you should look into yourself and think that if you did not change any beliefs in the last year or so, you probably didn't learn anything. Right? It's a little bit sad. So back to the curiosity mindset, right? If you're going to learn something, it means that you have to be willing to see new information that says something that you did not already know. All right? So this is really this idea of learning and mindset. Again, very extreme words here, but you have to be able to say to yourself, last year was not a good year. Like, really, I've made mistakes. And that's okay, right? Because the person you are today is better than the person you were last year, right? And same thing for next year. So question here your meta-knowledge. Separate your belief from who you are. And as well, I would say one of the key takeaways, do not follow the most confident person in the room, because they might be at the peak of overconfidence that I've shown in the Dunning-Kruger effect. And so try to push them a little bit about what are their data, what is important to their decision. Most important when you're collecting information, collect information on what you did not already know. I know it seems straightforward, but actually most of the time when we think about data, we're actually going to collect information that are going to defend our point of view. Right. One way sometimes to try to avoid collecting information about things we already knew is to do a pre-mortem. So a pre-mortem is thinking, let's say we are 2 years from now. It's just we imagine we are 2 years from now and we failed. We failed in what we were trying to do. Why did we fail? Right? And that's going to make salient things that were not in your frame at the beginning. Well, maybe the competition launched something. Maybe our costs were actually not the one we were thinking. Maybe there are some elements in the drilling section of something that, we thought we were sure, and then actually we found water and we could not build. So all of that are all the elements that maybe should get into your decision. So a few words to finish on intuition and coming to conclusion. One of the reasons that I started with my Paul the Squid example is that sometimes when we think about intuition, in sessions at HEC, sometimes participants tell me intuition is like a sixth sense. Right. And what I really want you to avoid, right, is to think about intuition as something that falls from the sky, from nowhere, on which you can have any type of insights. Intuition is not that. Okay. Intuition really, so first in research, we don't really like the term intuition. We talk about system 1. So in system 2, system 1 is what you traditionally call intuition. It's automatic, it's fast, it's effortless. And because I'm saying it's automatic, I just want to be everybody to exactly know what it means. Automatic means it will come to you. Any way you're thinking, whatever you do, you will have an automatic intuition about anything. You cannot do anything against that, right? But what we can do is activate, in case of very large strategic decision, our system 2. The system 2 is deliberate. It is slow, right? So to make a very quick parallel, system 1 is what allows you to cross a road when you're looking at a car coming and you're like, I have time to cross, I'll go. Right? This is system 1. You've learned since you were a kid that, I have time to go. You've learned and it became automatic. System 2 would be, taking a paper and a pencil and then looking at the speed of the car and trying to make the computation about the length and in how many seconds the car could be hitting you and at what speed you should cross the street, right? We are surviving because of system 1. System 1 happens in any type of situation. But for a large strategic decision, the problem of system 1 is that it takes into account things that we should not be taking into account, right? It takes into account your overall mood. It takes into account the weather outside. It takes into account whether you had a disagreement with your spouse, right? So intuitive thinking, we love relying on intuition, but most of the time, for large strategic decision, not thinking is not going to help, right? And we like relying on our intuition because it's very feeling-based, right? And it makes us feel good about ourselves if we end up thinking we were correct, right? But again, back to Paul the Squid, and this is why I use this example at the beginning. If you're thinking, most decisions are framed as binary decisions. Should we launch or not launch? I'm telling you, by all means, you have 50% chance of being correct, right? This is not decision-making. This is not just intuition. This is just you have the odds in your favor, right? But so the problem is that there's lots of noise in intuition. So there's only 2 moments you can actually use your intuition. You have when you actually have expertise and the environment is very regular, right? So you actually learn something, it's automated. The environment is always the same. Think firefighters, for instance. Think guides in mountain. Think about pilots. Right? Think about the military, and sometimes at HEC we have people coming from the military to actually explain System 1, right? And how they rely on it and how all the training that they do is actually System 1 based, right? But at the same time, most management decisions do not have a regular environment, right? Maybe some of them do, but not all of them. And we tend to say, I like to think my first impression is often right? We like to think of ourselves as good intuitive decision maker. But it's simply because we fall into the confirmation bias. So this is all my research on information distortion. We twist our interpretation of facts to actually make it fit what we want to believe, right? All right, so most, in a session as well, we talk about, okay, what about collective decision? If we ask other people, we should avoid all of those biases. Well, it depends on the composition of the group, right? And so back at the beginning, when I was talking about the power of a group, be very careful, because if you surround yourself with people who are actually similar to you, with the same school, the same ideas, we actually tend to show groupthink. So having several people who think the same thing does not add anything, right? It's just on the opposite. It can actually bring even more overconfidence because people actually tell you you're right? Because they think the same thing. So that can actually as well hinder the decision-making process. So all I'm asking you after today, as a good start, as an intro session, is to doubt your intuition. It will come naturally. Like, if there's nothing you can do, we have a first impression about people. I forgot the number of seconds, but it's something like 1 second. And that's okay. You know, but doubt it. Like, look at divergent information. Look at information that shows that maybe your first intuition was wrong, right? Try to, if you see somebody who is using intuition, try to see why they are using it, right? And try to recognize some decisions can be made intuitively. Some decision can be left to luck. It can happen, right? It's where you're going to go to a restaurant tonight. There's no strategic impact on other people, so why not use your intuition? So to know more about intuition, this is the second Nobel Prize research today. This is Daniel Kahneman on System 1 and System 2. And I'll finish with, you know, because most of the time we say, okay, I'm not going to be biased because I have my experience. The experience is actually feeding my intuition, right? And I'm going to tell you, be careful about your experience because your experience is playing tricks with you. So to learn from your experience, it means understanding why something worked or did not work, right? So back to what I was, to the framework I was proposing at the beginning, you have your decision process and you have your results. There is chance factors. So imagine if you had a good outcome. You've launched your product, it was successful. Who is responsible here? You. You had a great decision-making process, you're a great leader, a great decision-maker. If you had a negative outcome, what is salient in our mind? You know, this person in my team, they left, I could not have predicted X, so okay, this is what's salient. Now it's very, very tricky. Is that for somebody else, imagine in your mind somebody you don't like too much. Right? This person had a positive result, positive outcome. Who is responsible? This person got lucky. Right? And if this person had a negative outcome, I knew it all along. Right? So it is very difficult to actually think about the causality of events. Right? We tend to attribute our success to skill and our failures to bad luck. So here, maybe the most important thing to remember is that if you have a failure in your team, is actually ask, why did this happen? Not who is responsible, right? Because you have to see the big picture, that it's not about the decision-making process, maybe, or maybe it is, and then that can be changed. There may be some uncontrollable factor, right? And so it's very important to actually have the right to speak up, the right to fail, and the right to change your mind as well as a leader, and to cultivate that in teams to actually be able to make a better decision next time based on experience. Right. All right, these are the biases that I've talked about today. I have a concluding slide here with all the little cues, tips that I give you for each step. Between framing, collecting information, which means collecting divergent information, beware of your intuition, even though it will come naturally, and learning from experience. Thank you. If you have questions, I'm very happy to answer.